Hello everybody, hope you're doing well. This lecture I'm going to cover Chapter 2, so community, policy, and social action. This is going to be a long one, so I'm probably going to break this up into probably two short videos. And I'm going to add in quite a bit more into this lecture that was included in the book. So there's some things I feel the book left out that I think are important, so I'm going to add those in. So this is going to be quite a hefty chapter, okay? So I'm just letting you know, giving you guys a heads up. It's going to be a lot. Okay, so this is kind of what we're looking at in terms of concepts that we need to be familiar with for this chapter. The textbook does provide or does go over some of these concepts, but not in the way that I think that it should. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So just letting you know, it's going to be about 30 slides, give or take. So I'll break that up though, okay? So let's go ahead and just jump into what I think is important before we start talking about the rest of the concepts for this chapter. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is kind of remind ourselves that when we're discussing social issues or social problems, that we need to understand the different perspectives, right? So remember last week we talked about conservatives, liberals, and then radicals, right? And obviously there's variations of those, but those are the three main that I want to focus on, and that's the way that we're going to view these concepts. So in terms of social issues or social problems, right, conservatives are going to argue that it's more of an issue of personal responsibility. So the idea is that the problems that we encounter, right, in society are the result of personal failings. So having a hard time finding a job, it's a personal issue. Having a hard time paying for something, it's a personal issue, right? If there's whatever issues you're dealing with as an individual, the argument is it's probably going to be related to some kind of personal failing or some kind of issue where you're defective or deficient in some way, right? So personal responsibility is the go-to, right? So the current system has a more or less fair arbiter of what people's work is worth. Essentially, it's the idea that if I get paid minimum wage or barely minimum wage, it's because the work I'm doing is minimum wage work, right? And if I get paid, a middle class wage, is because the work I'm doing is a middle class. I deserve it, right? So essentially, a merit-based system, right? I'm skilled and gifted in some way, and because of those skills and those gifts, then I deserve to have this position within society, earn this amount of money. That's the argument, right? So it's up to the individual to determine what their social standing is, right? And that's kind of the idea for conservatives as far as social issues, right? All right. Liberals, well, going to be the opposite of that, right? Liberals are going to argue that it's societal's responsibility, right? So if I'm having a hard time finding a job, it's not because I'm defective or deficient, right? And let's say I went to school, I have the degrees, right? I have the education, I have the minimum requirements for that position, right? It's going to be something else, right? Maybe it could be issue of age, it could be issue of race. Maybe I didn't go to the right school. Maybe I should have done more in terms of extracurricular activities, right? As far as making myself a better candidate. Like, there could be any number of things, right? But the idea is that if we're having a hard time finding work, if we're having a hard time buying a house, things like that, it's not just the individual, right? It could be larger external forces or factors that are preventing the individual from succeeding wherever they want to succeed, right? Like I said, if I want to buy a house right now in Orange County, why am I not able to do that, right? I have a master's degree, right? I'm not too far ahead of you, so I'm assuming that sooner, right? Hopefully much sooner than later, right? You guys will have your degrees. You guys will be off and running in your own, the direction you want to move as far as your careers, and hopefully you'll be paid, right, enough money to live the life that you want, right? And that's kind of the goal. But if you're not able to do that, well, let's say you are successful in achieving your goals, right? Is that success still enough, right? Is that going to be enough to pay for the life that you want, right? So if I can't buy a house in Orange County, even though I've gone to school, I've gotten the degrees, right? I'll probably go get more degrees, right? What's the average price of a home in Orange County right now? It was like $700,000 was the median, not $800,000 depending. So you're looking at almost $4,000 or $5,000 a month, right, in your mortgage payment, right? So if you can't afford a house in Orange County, is it because you're just not working hard enough, right? So the idea is if you, whatever social issues you're experiencing may not be the result of your own doing, right? So sociological imagination stuff, right? Sounds very familiar. But that's the idea, right? So it's not about personal responsibility, right? But societal responsibility, right? The institutions that we live under are supposed to provide us with those resources that we need, right? Not to say they're supposed to hand them to us per se, right? But the idea is if we jump through the hoops that society says we should jump through, there should be something waiting for us, right? On the other end, right? I do everything you want me to do as far as school, work, be law-abiding, right? I don't lie, I don't cheat, I don't steal, right? I go to your schools, your institutions, and the idea is if I follow through, there should be something for me there. And if there's not, then that's a failing on the that we can blame on society, right? As far as institutions. So that's one way of looking at it, right? And another way to look at it would be radicals, right? Here I had radical left, but radical left or radical right, it's still radical, right? And the idea is we're going to go ahead and change the system, right? The status quo that exists isn't working for us, whether it's left or right, and we're going to go ahead and establish a new system, right? A new world order, perhaps, right? We're going to change the system in such a way to benefit us, right? We're no longer satisfied working within the system the way that it exists currently, right? So, yeah, upheaval, revolution, revolting, things like that. And that's kind of the idea for the radicals, right? Whether it's left or right, it's change, right? Not just working within the system, but actual changing of the system itself. All right, social stratification. Now, in the edition that you have for the textbook, it'll cover some of these concepts, right? Like I said, I wanted to go into more detail just so we understand what these concepts are, because you're going to be using them when we start writing our papers, right? Depending on what you want to write your paper on, what social problem you're interested in. But we need to understand these concepts, right, before we can start applying them. So social stratification, pretty simple, right? It's how we rank, essentially, categories of people, right? There's a pecking order within our system. So we have lower class, middle class, and upper class. As far as dollar amounts, there are dollar amounts that obviously are tied into these, but it's kind of more of a lifestyle, right? Per se, and I guess example of that would be, if I lived in Orange County and I'm making six figures, right? Would I be lower class or would I be middle class? And I'd argue if I'm single, right, making $100,000 a year, what would you say? Would I be middle class or lower class? Well, let's think about it, right? If I'm making $100,000 a year, if I want to purchase a property, depending on what property I want to purchase, even say let's like a condo or townhouse, I'm looking at what, at least a good $600,000 maybe, right? But then again, taxes, I'm single, I don't have any dependents, things like that. So I'd probably be more on the lower class end, right? Maybe like at the top portion of the lower class, or maybe like just scraping by as far as like lower middle class, right? But if I take that same 100,000 and I, transplant myself, right? If I move to a place like maybe Tucson or some other part of the country, right? Where the cost of living is much lower, and I take my $100,000 a year over there, I could probably comfortably stay in the middle class, okay? But I have no delusions of grandeur. I'm definitely not upper class, right? So that's the idea, right? Social classes are essentially just categories of people who have similar access to resources and opportunities. So working class, blue collar, those are just social classes: middle class, upper middle class, social classes, and then upper class, right? And then we have this concept. This was definitely in your text, right? This idea of life chances, right? So life chances, you can kind of think about it as being, or think about it as winning the birth lottery, right? What family were you born into? What resources does your family have available to them and to you, right? So what family you're born into will dictate what those resources are, right? You know, are your parents college educated? Are your grandparents college educated, right? Does your family have investments, things like that? We'll talk about wealth, right? And if they have those things, right, then it definitely improves your life chances, improves the chances that you'll go to a better school, receive a better education. It increases the chances that you're going to make better connections. So as far as networking, right, you'll be connected to people who can help you find jobs, or even before jobs, right? Help you get into universities, things like that, right? The idea of, like, what's it called? Like the Uncle Jimmy, right? Thing. Do you have an uncle that works there? Yeah, I do. I have an uncle that works there. I have a family friend that works there. They can put a good word for me. They can pull my name out of the stack of applications and help me get that job, that position, right? Whatever it may be, right? So if you are connected to people that are also well connected, it improves your life chances. Okay, not a difficult concept to understand, but it's an important one, right? And you can just ask yourselves, right? How many of you have gotten a job because of somebody that you know, right? I've gotten plenty of jobs from people that I know, relatives, friends of family. The only problem is that my relatives and my friends are working class and blue collar, so they're helping me get working class and blue collar jobs, right? If I had friends that were, middle class or upper middle class, right? Or my family was middle class or upper middle class, they would help me get what kind of jobs? Probably jobs in the middle class and upper middle class. My life chances would have been better, is the idea, right? But now that I have a degree and I do the kind of work that I do, let's say I did have children, right? Would their life chances be improved because of the position that I'm currently in, right? And the idea is that they would, just like your children, right? You guys are all pretty ambitious, right? Based on your student introductions, which I have read, and it's exciting. You guys got some good stuff going on. And think about it. If you're successful in reaching those goals, how much better off will your children be, if you have children, right? As far as their life chances. Okay, and that's the idea. So social class, life chances, it's important. All right, moving forward. Now we got to talk about wealth, right? And I think we have an idea, right? When we think of wealth, when you hear the term wealth, it's an image that comes to mind, at least for me, right? But wealth is a very interesting thing, maybe a little tricky thing, right? In terms of conceptualizing it, right? I think even for myself, I'll speak for myself. I didn't realize what wealth was until I actually made friends with people whose families were wealthy, right? I think it's that, if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't, right? So if you have ever spent time around people or have friends, right, or even your own families, right? But if you grew up working class and blue collar, and then you made friends with people who are definitely middle class or upper middle class, or in the upper class, you realize how very different life is, right? As far as life chances, circumstances, right? Access to resources. It's a substantial difference in the terms of the way we live, right? And if you don't have access to people who are in those classes, right, then you wouldn't know. And sometimes I wish I didn't, right? And if you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. It's hard to go back, right? It's hard to see people that have wealth, right? And then to compare yourselves. Even though we shouldn't, it's difficult not to, right? But what is wealth, right? So let's just kind of talk about what wealth is as far as, the text, right? So we have the idea of, or concept of income, right? Salary or wages from a job, earnings from investments and other sources, right? So we have our income. And incomes are very different, right? From working collar, middle class, and upper class. But wealth is important. And it's important to understand what wealth truly is, right? So wealth is the value of assets owned by an individual or a household, right? So it's not just how much money you make a year, right? And for people that are wealthy, that's not even a paycheck in that sense, right? They're not clocking in and out, and they're not getting paid by the hour. It's something very different than that. Wealth, it could be obviously a paycheck, right? But it's your investments. It's all the resources that you have access to, right? And anything could be a resource, right? It's not just these tangible, just not just like cash, right? It's not, which is tangible, but things that aren't, right? Education, networking, those kind of resources are also a part of what I consider to be somebody's wealth, right? What's fascinating about wealth is that it preserves itself, right? So if I was wealthy, I'd be able to pass down that wealth to my children, right? And like I said, it's not just me passing down, cash or real estate or other investments, right? Which obviously is important, but it's everything else that goes along with it, right? It's an entire lifetime of growing up wealthy. It's a cultural capital that goes along with it, right? And cultural capital is, like I said, the knowledge that comes with being wealthy. So I guess an example of this and why it's so important, right? Blue collar, working class background. My family understood that education was important, but they're not educated themselves. So what could they pass on as far as education, as far as, what an education is, what college experience is, right? They understand that it's important, but they couldn't provide much more than that, right? Now, if I'm college educated, I am, and I had kids, what could I pass on to them, right? They would see what the lifestyle of somebody who's college educated looks like because they grew up in that household, right? Of individuals who were college educated. Say if I married somebody else who had a college degree, right? So they would see what that looks like, right? And then they would have access to those resources growing up, right? And those resources would be education, right? I've made the mistakes, just like you, right? If you were to, some of you may even have children now. So if you have children now, or maybe younger siblings, or just somebody who's younger than you, I would argue you'd be able to help them navigate college, right? As far as things to do, not to do, right? You'd be able to provide them with advice. Okay, that's the idea, right? That's a part of wealth or generational wealth, right? Is that cultural capital that we pass down. Okay. The argument is that it creates opportunities, secures a desired stature and standard of living, or class status, right? And that's pretty much what we've been talking about, right? It passes down everything that I am. So if I made it to the middle class, I would pass that lifestyle down to my children, right? And they would hopefully do better than me. And that's the hope, right? That with those resources that are provided, our children will do better than us. And the sad part is that this generation, I think it was almost millennials or Generation Z, I forget which one it was. I think it's millennials. Millennials would be the first generation, I guess, quite some time that has not done as well or is not expected to do as well as the previous. So the idea is that our parents have done better than us, right? And we'll get into that a little later, right? But how do we measure wealth, right? So they measure wealth in two ways. Gross assets, right? Total value of assets someone owns, and then net worth, right? The value of those assets minus the amount that you owe, right? So you could have real estate, you can have, 401k, you can have a lot of investments, right? And we're going to look at those investments and the value of those investments against what you owe, right? So if you have a lot of investments and you don't owe a lot, then obviously your net worth is pretty high. So that's the idea, right? We're going to look at it in a few different ways. So I hope that makes sense. The next thing I want to cover is taxation. The text didn't provide too much on this. I just kind of want to briefly go over it just so we kind of understand taxation. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the taxes itself, but just kind of what it's supposed to do for us as a country, right? As the institutions are supposed to do with it, right? So taxation itself is viewed as a tool that we use to redistribute wealth, right? So we pull money through taxes, and we take the money that we have and we redistribute it to needy causes, infrastructure, things like that, welfare systems, you name it, right? And we've seen plenty of this, right? I mean, COVID, right? COVID hit, people weren't able to work, and then we were getting what? I think it was $600 on top of whatever unemployment would be, right? And then we have stimulus checks that went out. We have Medi-Cal, Medicaid. We have quite a few different programs, right, that we run. So, I guess just some examples, right, of how our tax money is spent. So this idea is that it's like almost like a modern day Robin Hood, right? You take from the rich and you give to the poor, right? And right now there's a big push within our country to tax who? Who do we want to tax? Or who do we want to tax more? Who do we feel are not paying their fair share of taxes, right? So the argument is that we are supposed to tax, if it's a progressive tax, right? The wealthy should be paying the most, right? And some would argue that the wealthy are not paying the most. Some would argue that the wealthy are not paying their fair share of taxes, right? So we've heard stories, right, about wealthy companies not paying their fair share, right? I think, what was it? Was it Bezos or something? It was like $40 billion, something ridiculous, right? I'm not exactly sure. We can look that up right later, or maybe we can do a discussion board about it. But if you pay attention to the news, you'll know that one of the big issues, right, is the lack or the amount that wealthy people are paying for taxes. And the reason why it's difficult to tax them is because the way their income is acquired, right? It's not a paycheck, right? It's through their, I think that's the way to put it, their investments, right? So it's very different from the way most people are taxed. But the argument, though, right, is that by taxing individuals, this progressive tax, right? So taxing individuals who make more money, more taxes, it's supposed to help us close the gap on inequality, right? So families with lower pay at a lower rate receive more financial benefits from the government, and those with high incomes pay at a higher rate and receive fewer benefits. So this is the way some would argue that it's supposed to be, right? And then we can go back and forth if we feel this is the way that it is, whether we feel that it is right or wrong, right? I'm not going to go over it right now, but just think about it, right? So taxes, social issue, right? Or problem, we'll say issue or phenomena. And then I'd ask you to think conservative, liberal, radical. How would a conservative view taxes or progressive taxes, right? How would a liberal view it, and how would a radical view it, depending if they're radical left or radical right, right? And then, that's where you apply the concept, right? What do you think? And maybe we'll do a discussion board about that, right? Maybe that's what we'll do this week. But that's the idea, right? That's my question to you. How would they view it? So the government levies a tax on what we earn and what we buy for three major reasons, right? So why are we getting taxed? Okay, so the first reason would be the government needs money to operate, right? Infrastructure, military, you name it, right? We need this money. I'm trying to think of something the government was spending money on recently. Home COVID tests. So I think that's done. But for quite some time, you could go ahead and request free COVID-19 home tests, right? And the government was paying for that. That's done. Vaccinations the government was paying for. That's done. So there's a lot of things that the government does pay for, right, to help it operate. You can argue that the government uses taxes to discourage certain types of behavior. So what would be an example of that? Pretty good example would be smoking. So if you smoke, you know that a pack of cigarettes is about, what is it now, $10, $12, right, for a pack. So the government's going to charge you, it's going to tax, going to charge you more for that pack of cigarettes in hopes that you do what? Stop smoking. Just one example. And the third reason would be to redistribute, right, and reduce economic inequality. So those are the three reasons why the government taxes and what they do with their tax dollars, right? Infrastructure, discourage behavior, right? And then close the gap on inequality or the goals, right? And we can definitely go back and forth, right, about whether or not this is what is actually happening, right? I'm not going to lead you on this one, but we can go, right? We can definitely talk about that in discussion boards. Not all taxes are progressive, right? So the tax on gasoline isn't set by what? So if a tax is progressive, it's based on how much you're making, right? But gasoline isn't based on how much you're making, right? It's based on what? Crude oil, right? The price. And we can argue, we can go back and forth, right, too, on why gas prices go up, right? Why taxes go up. Gas prices they're still high, but they were really high about 2-3 months ago. For the last couple of months, right? I don't think we've ever seen gas that expensive. It was like $6, $7, $8 a gallon, depending on where you're at in Southern California, which is extremely high, right? But this is why it's not progressive, right? It's based on other factors. So this would be regressive, right? So it doesn't matter if you're rich, doesn't matter if you're poor, middle class, working class, doesn't matter what you are, you're paying the same for gas. That's it, right? So whether you're rich or poor, gasoline, it's separate from that, okay? So moving forward. All right, so this is going to be a profile of people that we consider to be rich, right, or wealthy or upper class, right? So who are these people, right? Who are these wealthy folks within our society? The family within the top 10%, right? Maybe 15, 20%, but 10% for sure, right? You're looking at an income of at least $196,000. The average is $294,000. So there you go. If you're pulling in like $200,000, right? And if you are, congratulations. But if you're pulling close to that, or if you're pulling $200,000, right, then you're considered to be in the top 10, right? And who are you? Usually you're older, right? Why would it be older people? Well, we could argue that they have had more time to progress, right, within their careers and professions, and to a point where they can command that kind of money, right? Men. So as far as gender, it would be men, more men making that money than women. Married couples, because, well, combined incomes, right, definitely does help. So if I'm making $100,000 a year and my wife is making $100,000 a year, my partner is making $100,000 a year, then we, as a home, right, as a household, we're making over $200,000 a year. So that helps. And then we start looking at race, right? Non-Hispanic whites would be about 69%. This has probably changed. Like, these figures are probably a little old. 44% of African Americans and 45% of Hispanic families, right? So just kind of a really quick little snapshot, right, of who these wealthy folks are. All right. Oops. My apologies. All right. So in many categories, they have, well, obviously incomes, right, the top 10%. What's important, though, about their position within our society, right, is the power that comes with it. So what is power? Power is the ability for me to control my own destiny, as well as the lives or the destinies of others. So if I was wealthy, right, let's say I won the lottery, right, say I won a couple $1 million. I can argue that I'm now wealthy, but does that make me powerful, right? And I'd argue that it wouldn't make me powerful. Just winning the lottery would not make me powerful. It would make me wealthy, but not powerful, because I wouldn't have what? The ability to influence other people just through winning the lottery. Now, granted, I could take that money and invest and maybe kind of work my way into a position within society where I can dictate, right, where I can control the lives of other people, right? But initially, no. So the reason why this is important, right, is that people that are wealthy, families that are wealthy, have the ability to control their lives and the lives of others. So think of wealthy corporations, think of wealthy families, and how much power they have in terms of influencing our government, right? And some people argue that they are our government, right? That our politicians and that our political figures are beholden to powerful companies, right? Joe Manchin would be an example of one of these people recently, right? I'm trying to use examples, right, that are current. Joe Manchin is a Democrat that some would argue has made it very difficult for the Democratic Party to pass a lot of their bills and essentially take care of a lot of the things on the agenda for the Democratic Party. And the issue with a lot of people with Manchin is that he has ties to the coal industry, right? So the idea is that this powerful industry can manipulate or control Manchin because financially he's connected to them, right? So there may be a conflict of interest there, right? But is Joe Manchin a powerful individual? He most definitely is, right? Because he's able to do what? He's able to influence the lives of, well, millions of people. That makes you powerful. And the image I have here would be the Waltons, right? The world's richest or wealthiest family. So the Waltons get $4 million richer every hour, right? So, the Waltons are worth, I don't know, 200 billion or I don't know, like 250 billion. I'm not sure now. You can look it up. But they're so wealthy that every hour they make, a couple $1 million, which is an obscene amount of money, right? But it's not just the money that they make, right? It's what that money allows them to do, right? They are very influential, right? So that's the idea, right? You can control your life and the lives of others, because they have access to those political leaders. All right, so poverty line and poverty rate. I think there's one more. Oops, my mistake. So poverty line, poverty rate. Just a little snapshot, right? Just in case you weren't sure, right, where it's at. So the poverty line is the excuse me, is the income level set by the government for the purpose of counting the poor, right? So one person, annual household income, 12,000. Two persons, 15,000. Which is fascinating in itself, right? So one person, 12,000. That's not cutting it. We're not even close. So as one person living in Orange County, making 12,000 a year, how well are you doing? Let's say it's you and one other person, whoever the other person may be, whether it's, I don't know, a child, a partner, or maybe you're taking care of an elderly parent. So two individuals in a household, 15,000. Three persons, 18. Four persons, 24. 5, 6. You get the idea, right? 9 people. Annual household income of 50,000. Like I'd argue in Orange County, you would need to be making at least 50,000 for one person, right? So this is way off, right? And I know that we are not cutting it on $12,000 a year for one person. Okay, it's not even close. And, well, that's why we have a lot of the issues that we do have, right? So how do we gauge, right? This is a concept that was definitely in your textbook. So absolute poverty and relative poverty. So let's cover these really quick so we know what we're talking about. So absolute poverty, the best way to think about this is my life in danger? And your life's in danger because you're missing one of these kind of very crucial things. So if I don't have access to shelter, right? But what kind of shelter, right? Adequate shelter, right? I'm just not talking like, a wood shack, right? Is not adequate shelter. So access to a shelter would be something where you'd have, I'd argue, at least, right? Some sort of utilities, right? Electric, water, and then like sewage, right? At the very least. Right? Maybe even just water and sewage, right? Maybe, right? You can still use a candle, right? But the sewage and water is important, right? Because you need access to water, and then we need sewage to obviously remove those things so we don't get sick from that. So adequate shelter, food, right? Adequate food, water, so safe drinking water, right? And we know that over the years, right, United States, and depending on what state you live in, haven't had access to safe drinking water, right? Flint, Michigan, I think was one of them. There's a few more. I forgot what state it was. There's a state right now currently that's telling or warning residents not to shower with their mouths open. So if you're taking a shower, just don't shower with your mouth open. You'll be fine because the water that's coming out of the faucet, right, is not safe to drink or ingest, which is scary. We should be doing better, right? So potable water, sanitation, right? Restrooms, things like that, basic medical needs, access to education, and I would argue access to the internet is what I would argue. Is so education, but the internet as well. I mean, at this point, and I would argue that in order to be competitive, right? In order to keep up with society, you're gonna need access to the internet. It's just the way it is, right? You're not really doing much without it. You get a job without internet, right? I mean, granted, you could probably still get a job, right, without having access to the internet, but it's been a long time since I've walked into a place and asked for a paper application, right? You need the internet, right? So if you're like any of those things, your life's in danger, absolute poverty, right? And then we have relative poverty, right? And this is tied or linked to a country's income, right, overall. And really what it is it's asking if the average citizen within a country has it. Well, essentially, what you're doing is you're measuring yourself. So, do I have the ability to live the life of what we consider to be the average person within a country, right? So, in our country, well, the United States, right, we'd argue that the goal would be like a middle class life, right? I'm fighting for middle class life. I'm sure that if you are middle class now, you want to stay at least middle class. And if you're not middle class like me, then you want to be at least middle class. So that's what we'll do, right? We'll measure ourselves against this middle class income, and that's relative poverty, right? Because yeah, I have a home, I have a place to live. Maybe I don't own it, but I rent it, but I have the ability to rent, right? So which is taking care of the shelter thing. I mean, I have access to food. There's some foods I would like access to, but maybe I'll cut corners. But I have access to food. I have access to water. I have access to all the things that I need. Maybe just not at the level of other people. And other people would be middle class, right? So that's how I measure myself. I mean, I have like Orange County, right? Let's say something like this. Maybe a good example, right? Access to transportation. So in Orange County, we have access to the bus, right? So even if you can't afford to buy a car, right? You can't afford to buy, I guess, a motorcycle, but I see that more as like a toy than necessity. Even if you don't have money to buy a vehicle, right, to get you from point A to point B, you still have access to what? Public transportation. And public transportation is pretty cheap. It's been a long time since I've been on a bus. I remember it being $1, but I'm sure it's might have gone up. But if you're a college student, I think most buses or there's usually some kind of program that if you're a college student, you can ride the bus for free, right? So even in our country, right, where people are struggling the way that they are, where poverty does exist, it's still a situation where you measure against what? That median, right? That middle class life, right? I don't have a car, but there's a bus, right? If I wanted to drink water, right? Can I go onto a college campus, Cal State Fullerton? Can I walk onto campus here and use the restroom? Can I walk into the campus here and drink water? I can. So those things are available, right? I'm sure there's like a food pantry here for students. I know other campuses that I'm at, there's food pantries that are provided by the school, and there's other food pantries available that are provided by churches and other nonprofit organizations, right? So even within our country, there's places where you can go where you can get food, right? Not ideal, definitely not ideal, but the food's there. That's relative poverty. Okay, so like this image here, right? This is, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl, but this is their food option, right? They're rummaging through dumps, right? Their access to water, the water they're going to drink is going to be substandard at best. I mean, you could actually die from the water that you drink, right? And you get the idea. So absolute poverty, relative poverty is the way we measure, right? You look at a country, is the population at risk of losing their lives because they don't have access to one of these things? Or is it a situation where their population doesn't have the ability to live the life of the average or the mean or the middle class, right? How they measure themselves, right? So that's the way we differentiate between the two, right? And then we have this, then we have the poverty gap, right? So the poverty gap, I don't think they covered in the text. Right? A lot of the stuff they didn't cover in the text, unfortunately. So here we are. So the poverty gap is the difference between the official poverty line, so what the government would argue is the poverty line, and the actual income of the typical poor household, right? So in 2014, the argument is, or they're going to say that the poverty gap is about 12,000. So it's about $12,000 difference between what the government considers to be official poverty line and what the actual income is. So that's a pretty significant amount. Like I said, these are old. This might have changed. I'm sure it has changed, but I'm guessing it probably hasn't. It's probably increased. I would imagine it's gone down. If it has gone down over, since this was since 2014, it might have gone down, but it's definitely probably going back up right now. So poverty gap. So when they mention poverty gap, this is they're referring to, right? All right. This was covered in the textbook. Who are the poor, right? And there's essentially the poor. We can look at just demographics, right? As far as the age, I would say elderly, right, for the most part, but the book's going to go children, right? And I would agree with that. Children are at greatest risk for poverty, right? So they make up about 35% of the poor within the United States. So children. And why do children represent this population? You can figure that out, right? Do children work? Can they work? They're a protected class in our society, right? And they're pretty much left to, they're at the mercy of whoever's responsible for them, right? So not a lot of options for children in terms of employment. Race, far more white people than black people are poor, right? Far more Hispanic than Hispanic people live in poverty. The percentage of minority people who are poor is higher than that of whites, right? So there's a lot of demographics. There's a lot of percentages that the book covers. I'm not going to go into all those, right? But just be aware that race is a factor, age is a factor. Of course, gender is going to be a factor, right? We can get into those details later, right? Feminization of poverty, right, is this idea that women suffer more than men do in terms of poverty, right? And we can argue that based on, and this isn't a family class, right? But if you think about, like, traditionally, right, the standard North American family model, which is this nuclear family model where the dad or the male is the breadwinner and the mom or the woman would be the homemaker, right? If the father leaves or that family dissolves, essentially, he takes the wealth with him, and then she's left to kind of fend for herself, right? And usually women end up with the kids, so it's the woman, children that are now struggling to, I guess, close that gap. Essentially make up for the amount of income that was lost when the relationship dissolved, right? So gender is definitely one of them. Trust me, there's other things that go into it as far as gender. We can get into that later. Just be aware that these are factors, right? Family patterns, right, greatly reduces the risk of being poor. So what pattern would that be? We could argue that single-family residences, if they're healthy, right, would probably do a better job of maintaining resources, combines incomes and shares expenses to help build this income and wealth, right? So two incomes are better than one, right? It's kind of the argument, right? I'm not saying that single-family residences, or single-family families aren't healthy and productive, or it's just kind of this very just general idea, right, of a way of looking at it. Like I said, if the family's healthy, two-parent household, or would be ideal, right, in terms of income as far as resources. Religion, I'm not going to get into that, but like I said, just be aware of these. All right, working versus non-working poor. Oof. All right, this is important, right? And I'll talk about this. I'm sure I have talked about this already, and I'll keep talking about it some more. This idea of the American dream, right? And the American dream has been weakening since the 1970s. it's gotten progressively more difficult to achieve that American dream. Okay, so like I said, Orange County, right? It's difficult to obtain the American dream in Orange County. What was the American dream? Being able to buy the things you need, being able to buy the things that you want, and still have enough money to save and invest, right? So in Orange County, those three things have become much more difficult to obtain if you're blue collar working class, or maintain if you're already in the middle class, right? It's just getting harder to maintain those things. All right. But the idea is that we feel like we're falling behind. We feel like things are getting more expensive. It's getting harder to maintain that middle class life or achieve that middle class life. And no matter how hard we work, no matter what degrees we get ourselves, right, it just seems like it's kind of out of our grasp, right? No matter how hard we try, we always seem to fall a little short, right? So the earnings of a typical 50-year-old man working full-time has jumped 72% between 58 and 73. So that's a long time ago, right? These are old figures. And the idea is that they have not gotten better. And the belief in the American dream has declined from 71% in 2002 to 51% in 2013. So where is this at now, right? I'm sure we could find some statistics, right? Some polls on where we're at with the American dream as far as a society, right? Do we still believe in it? And I argue we do, right? I still believe in it, and you still believe in it, because here we are. I'm working. You're working, right? You're students. You're jumping through the hoops just like I am, because we believe that if we keep doing this, then we will be successful, right? So even though it's declining, we still believe in it. Just not in the way that we used to, right? We're not as confident as we used to be, right? In terms of the American dream being something we can obtain. All right, so these are some concepts that weren't in the book, right? The working poor. I use the term middle class, blue collar. This is also one of them, right? The working poor, which many of us are, right? And like I said, some of you may not realize this, right? Where you fall in as far as upper class, middle class, and working class, but you know now, right? So the working poor. Individuals and families who maintain a regular employment, right? So me and you, part-time, maybe you're part-time, maybe you're full-time, right? At least 27 weeks or more a year, give or take, but remain in relative poverty due to low levels of pay and dependent expenses, right? So the idea is we work hard, we do what we're supposed to do, but we're just not getting paid or compensated enough, right? To what? Essentially get ahead, right? We can't get ahead. How much are you saving right now, right? Think about it. What are your investments right now? Are you making enough even to invest? Or are you making just enough to what? Maintain, right? And keep from, right, ending up homeless. 16% of the heads of poor families work full-time and remain below poverty line, right? So even with full-time work, it's not cutting it. What's full-time? It's 40 hours a week, right? What's the pay? $15 an hour right now in California. Is it $15, $16 an hour? Minimum wage, even at minimum wage, right? What is that, like 15, 16, probably barely scraping $2,000. Yeah, scraping $2,000, and then with taxes, right? How much they're pulling out. If you have dependents, right, then maybe you can keep more of that. So how are you doing, just by yourself with $2,000 a month? Are you cutting it? Right? So you're working poor. The non-working poor, 56% of the heads of poor families don't work at all, and 28% work part-time, right? So there we go. Why are people not working? So the idea is that there's reasons, right? People don't work, right? It could be poor health, lack of skills, lack of jobs, and lack of child care, right? So I'm not going to break all these down. These are definitely things we can get into, right? We can argue that, poor health it does definitely impact what type of jobs you can have, how much you can work, and your income. Lack of skills, well, that's not a hard one to understand, right? Here we are trying to get degrees. So we improve our skill set, right? Make ourselves better candidates, and hopefully we'll be able to, command a higher pay because of these skills. Lack of jobs depends on what jobs you're talking about, right? Some people argue there's plenty of jobs available right now. That we're not really in a recession because jobs are what? Plentiful. But what kind of jobs? What pay, right? We go back and forth on that. And then lack of childcare, right? Children or childcare are expensive. Childcare is expensive. So if you have children or have ever recently looked into childcare, it's expensive. I have a friend, and they paid. They were picky about the childcare, the preschool that their child went to, but I want to say they're paying like $1,500 a month in childcare, right? So, I mean, at $15 an hour, full time, right? Pretty much at that point, you're pretty much working a full time job just to pay for childcare. So, they're very difficult, right? Difficult things to accomplish. But that's kind of a snapshot, right, of the working poor. And then you have this concept of the underclass, right? So you have upper class, middle class, working class, and now we have underclass. This isn't discussed in the textbook, but it's important for sure. So who are the underclass, right? Poor people who live in areas with high concentrations of poverty and limited opportunities for schooling or work. Okay, so that's going to be textbook definition for that. But what does this look like, right? Who are these people? Where are these people? Where can we find them, right? Well, rural areas and urban areas, right? Think about it. Orange County. Do we have an underclass in Orange County? We do. Rural areas. I'm not too familiar with rural areas. Didn't spend too much time in rural parts of this country, but if anybody here has, feel free to share, right, in discussion boards. But the rural, right? So essentially what these two areas, rural and urban, right, have in common is a lack of what? What is lacking for the underclass? Right? Limited opportunities for schooling and work. It's pretty simple. It's not complicated, right? And when you have a community, whether it's rural or not, right, whether it's urban or not, if you have a community where education is not available and job opportunities aren't available, then you're going to have severe poverty. Communities will not make it. They will fall apart. Orange County, if you grew up in Orange County, I would argue pretty fortunate. LA, probably pretty fortunate, right? If you think about it, right? Everybody, not everybody here, but I'm sure many of you had like the classic, right, or the typical jobs for high schools, right? Like, so I'm as a high school senior, I was working already, right? I got a job working at a supermarket, then I got a job working at the mall, right? So that was a nice transition from like, being a kid, and then being a senior, working and getting an idea of what it was like to work, and then kind of moving into an adult world, right? Transitioning into adult life as far as responsibilities, right? We have those kind of like transitional jobs, right? So think about it. Think about not having, and those of you who, I'm sure many of you, right, in class have had those jobs. You worked at a mall, what you consider like entry level type work, right? We've had that. Can you imagine not having that? Imagine being in high school and not having the option to work. Getting out of high school, not having any malls or anywhere, close by where you can, get that entry level job. What are you going to do, right? Are you going to go to school? Like, if you can't, if those jobs aren't available, then the school's probably not available either, right? So you're stuck, is kind of what it is. You're stuck without a job, entry level for sure, because anything other than that, you're not going to qualify for, and education, And that's how these communities, that's why these communities exist. They lack those resources, right? And then we have this idea of like hyper segregation, right? Population that's found in inner cities and rural areas, which we've been talking about, right? These people are essentially blocked out of or prevented from participating or kept from gaining. They don't have access to the traditional avenues for success, right? Like we discussed, they don't have access to the jobs, don't have access to schools, and they essentially they're stagnant within these communities, right? So I hope that makes sense. And like I said, these are concepts that we're going to have to go over. Like I said, when we discuss race, gender, and all these, and we start getting into more social issues, and we start discussing those, these concepts and theories will come in handy. Right. See what this is. I want to discuss this. I guess there's a lot, so forgive me if I'm not exactly sure what I want you guys to focus on or not. All right, so these are some of the problems that are linked to poverty. We were discussed two of them, right? Lack of education, lack of jobs, food insecurity. So the idea is that you're not sure if you're going to get a meal or not. Short life expectancy. You're not getting access to healthcare in the way that people and the middle class, upper middle class would. So essentially, the idea is, something's hurting, something's not right medically, and you are afraid to go to the doctor. If there even is one available, right? You don't go because what? You're afraid of how much it's going to cost you, right? So people are not seeking medical treatment because they're afraid they're not going to be able to afford it, or they know they can't afford it, right? So they don't go, which is a horrible thing to have to think about, right? And some of you may have been there, right? Some of you might have thought about this. When's the last time you guys been to the dentist, right? When's the last time you've seen a doctor, right, for a checkup? Your primary care physician. How many of you even have a primary care physician, right? When's the last time you decided, well, do I want to go to the dentist, or do I want to pay, a bill? Do I want, we decide, right, what's more important, right? In our health, when we're younger, well, we're hopefully, right, the idea is that we're healthier when we're younger, and you kind of let things go, right? We let things go until they catch up to us, all right? And sometimes when things catch up to us medically, it's much worse than it would have been if we had taken care of it initially, right? And that could be for a lot of things. So, like I said, I'm not going to give you too much into it because I give too much detail or examples, because these are things that we're going to be able to discuss on the discussion boards, right? So start thinking about that, right? There's plenty of stories out there of people who couldn't go to the doctor, right? Or didn't have money to go to the doctor, and they didn't go, and it turned out to cost them their lives in some cases, right? Unfortunately. So for the poor, though, death comes earlier. Shorter life expectancy, more likely to die from, infections and diseases and things that they wouldn't have died from, right? So, like I said, it's us not taking advantage of. It's not essentially that. It's us not having access to those resources, right? We're not being able to afford to access those resources. All right. I'm going to skip this. I'm not going to beat you guys over. You guys can read this on your own. I'm not going to beat you over the head with it. Same thing with education. I'm not going to beat you guys over the head with this one. You guys can read this on your own. Crime and punishment, political alienation. Once again, those are things you can handle on your own. Let's see here. Welfare system. The welfare system is important. All right, I'll spend time talking about this. So the social welfare programs, right? This is important because it ties back to what we first started talking about, right? How conservatives, liberals, and the radicals would view our society, right? So conservatives, remember, social problems are personal problems. Liberals, social problems are problems they're created by society, right? So it's a system-based problem, right? So social welfare program. An organized effort by government, private organizations, or individuals to assist needy people defined as worthy of assistance. Who's worthy? Who should get the help from the government, right? Who are these people? Are you one of these people? Are we these people, right? Do we qualify? Think about it. Do you guys rely on social welfare programs? All right, I wish this was an in-person class right now, right? Because this would be a fun thing to talk about. Love this stuff. So, examples, right? President Biden just did what? with college education. Well, in terms not education, but in terms of student loan debts, right? He paid them off, depending on how much money you make, things like that, right? So there's obviously not everybody qualifies, but a lot of people getting quite a bit of money, right? That's going to go towards their student loan debts, right? So that could be considered a social welfare program. What else is there that we rely on, right? There's quite a lot, actually. Medi-Cal, Medicaid, Social Security, right? These are all what? Social welfare programs that we rely on, right? And the question is, like I said, who gets to qualify? So let's look at the Biden one, right, with school education as far as like college debt. Who qualifies? Right? I think it was, I haven't looked into it too much, right? Maybe we can do this for a discussion board too, right? How much money you're making. So if you're making, I think was it, I want to say over 200,000, 300,000? I'm not sure. Then you don't qualify, right? And if you're making less than 200 or something thousand, then you do qualify for a certain amount. So they're basing it on how much you make, right? So the idea is if you make over $200,000, then you should be able to afford to pay for your what? Your loans. And if you don't make that much money, then we're going to help you out. And depending on how much you make will determine how much help you get from us, right? The government. So that's how they determine who's worthy, right? Who gets to have that. So benefits people or activities defined as worthy. Okay. Benefits most of the U.S. population. Okay. Reduces economic inequality, but only a little. All right. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much more because I think maybe this would be a good one for discussion boards, but this is something we should think about, right? Social welfare programs, who gets the money, who doesn't, and how we view these people, right? Do you view people who receive social welfare as what? What's maybe some of the arguments, right? Lazy, entitled, not worthy, right? Taking advantage of the system. Maybe they're leeches, right? They're leeching off the government, right? I pay taxes and I'm not paying taxes to have those people, benefit, right? They should do it on their own, right? This is one way of thinking about it. So start thinking about these things in that way, right? So social welfare, and this is like a snapshot, right? This is definitely not in the textbook, but I think it's important, right? Because historically where we've been can help us figure out why we are where we're at currently, right? So in the colonial era, right, government was not well-established structure. Definitely was not. This is rural agrarian society. Limited to acts of personal kindness, which means that if you receive something from somebody, it's because they were simply being kind and not as a result of some sort of a structure, right? This isn't an institution that's providing kindness. This is an individual, right? Some circles, the poor were locked down, or looked down on, right? So this idea we're going to judge these poor people, right? So if you're poor, it's because it's your own doing. It's a moral failing, right? It's a moral weakness. If you're poor, it's because you are defective or deficient in some way, shape, or form, right? Not a result of larger external forces. Okay, and then we have early industrial era, right? Capitalist economy. So we have capitalism now, which encouraged what? The spirit of individualism, self-reliance, right? Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. If you're successful, it's because you made it happen, not because anybody helped you, right? Once again, it's kind of similar to maybe the way the Puritans or maybe colonial era, right? The idea is that it's still up to you, right? Maybe not a moral failing, but definitely a personal one, right? If you're not living the life that you want, whose fault is it? The argument is your fault, right? You failed to, roll up your sleeves and put in the elbow grease or whatever it is, right, to obtain the life that you want, right? So very similar to the colonial era, okay? Excuse me. And then we have 20th century, right? Influx of immigrants and expansion of the poor neighborhoods in large cities were seen as a threat. So what are we talking about here, right? This is going to be the, I think, the second wave? This is going to be the second big wave of immigration from Europe, right? I think it's going to be Irish, Italians, probably German, maybe it's people from like Eastern Europe, like a big push from Eastern Europe, right? In terms of immigration into the United States. We have the Depression, widespread unemployment, sent millions into poverty, and then poverty now seen as a social problem, not laziness, right? So this is there's a lot going on here, right, in the country in terms of the 20th century, right? So a lot of moving pieces here. But the big issue, right, would be, or the big one would be the Depression, right? And the Depression wasn't caused by an individual, right? So with the Depression, what it did was it affected everybody, right? Now, granted, poor people suffer more than wealthy people, and this is true today, right? When there's recessions or anything like that, wealthy people are more insulated from those things than poor people are. But the idea is, in the Depression, right, everybody took a hit, or the majority of people took a hit. And now it wasn't a situation where, oh, well, it's a personal problem, it's a societal problem, right? Because now wealthy people are hurting. So wealthy people are not going to blame themselves, right? They're going to blame somebody else. Who? The system, the institutions that we live under, right? So it was a situation where it forced them to kind of acknowledge the fact that there's things that can happen that are external to us that impact our lives. And it's not just easy to say, well, you're poor because, well, you're, defective or deficient, right? You're not working hard enough, right? Or a morally corrupt person or something like that, right? So then the Depression did anything, at least it was that, right? And then we have the idea of the New Deal, right? So President Roosevelt, 39-45, designed this program to help during the Depression, right? We need to bounce back. We need some kind of program that's going to help us get this country back on its feet, right? So this idea of Social Security was born, right? And this was probably the most important part of that deal, right? Providing monthly incomes to 46 million people, most of which are elderly. So what is this? This is a social welfare program, right? How many of you are relying or hoping on Social Security, right? You're going to turn, 65, whatever, was it 62, 63, 64? Somewhere in there you can start looking into filing for Social Security. I think the younger, the more you wait, or the longer you wait, the more you get. Something like that. I should probably look into it, just like you guys should too, right? But the hope is that when we get older, right, when we're all in our 60s, that we'll have access to Social Security, right? Where does the money from this come from? Tax dollars, right? Maybe it'll be there for us, maybe it won't. The generation now, where we have more old people now than we ever have in history, right? Thanks to healthcare and a bunch of other things, right? That people are living longer. So if you've got more people living longer, you have more people pulling from what? Social Security. So we'll have to pay into that. And hopefully then by the time we get there, there's still some left over, right? Is a way that some people are looking at it, right? As an issue. Changes in the welfare system, right? We've seen some definite changes in the welfare system. Most of this is tied to individuals essentially being able to prove that they're worthy, right? So what I mean by this is the Welfare Reform Act, right? 1996. So we've got the Clintons here. They ended welfare the way that we knew it. So essentially what they're going to do is they're going to add provisions. So if you are applying for welfare, then you need to prove that you need it, right? So the idea is you live within a certain dollar amount, right? You make a certain amount of money, that you're still working, that so for those of us now who've been on like unemployment, right? If you've ever been on unemployment, you go on unemployment, and it's not they're just giving you money, right? And you don't have to show anything. What do you have to show for unemployment? Do you know, right? You have to show that you're looking for work, right? So you have to show that you're looking for work, and you have to go and, depending on the program, depending on how you're going to do it. But the idea is that you have to prove to them that you're looking for work. What does the state want? The state wants to know that you're not just sitting back and just collecting unemployment checks, right? That you're actively trying to find work so that you can go off of unemployment. So, there's that idea. And there's this whole thing about, these kind of cultural tropes, right? We'll get into those, right? The welfare queen and things like that, right? These, leeches on the system. And like I said, we'll get into more detail on those, right? But that's the idea, right? We want to make sure that people that are getting welfare are deserving of welfare. And if you don't deserve welfare, then we're going to kick you off, right? And like I said, I guess the devil's in the details on that one, right? How do we determine if you deserve welfare, right? And just an example, right? I know somebody who qualifies for Section 8 housing, right? And there's a lot of people that do qualify for Section 8 housing. And a lot of these people don't get married, even though they may be with people. They may have a partner, a very committed partner that would be their spouse. They would get married to them, right? But they choose not to get married for financial reasons. What would be the financial reasons for not marrying somebody? So I have Section 8 housing, right? Let's say I qualify for it. I have Section 8 housing. If you don't know, it's a government program that helps people with their rent, right? Very simple. And based on my income. But if I get married, what would happen is that my income would what? Increase as a household. So if I marry somebody, their income gets combined with mine, and as a household now, we make too much money and we lose our what? We lose our Section 8 housing. So even those programs, right, some people argue are being taken advantage of. And we can go back and forth on whether or not that's taking advantage of a system, whether we should take advantage of systems. Is there an ethical issue, right, with taking advantage of systems like that? Except these are all fantastic discussion board options for us, right? Like if we were in an in-person class or not face-to-face, we would definitely be going over these in class, like group work, stuff like that. As far as whether or not I should be taking advantage of my Section 8 housing or any other kind of social welfare program, right? Should I feel bad about that? All right. Should I feel bad about taking unemployment? Should I feel bad about my Section 8 housing? Should I feel bad about any welfare program that I'm able to take advantage of, right? So we can get into that. All right. So that's it. My apologies if it's a little long. My apologies if I kind of glossed over some things. Like I said, I wanted to include a lot of these concepts because they weren't in the textbook, but I think they're important. We'll be using them when we discuss, discussion boards. When you start deciding what your topic is for your paper that we'll be getting to, and I want you to start thinking about that too. Think about what it is you want to do your paper on. What topic, what research topic you want to explore, right, and present on. All right. As always, if you have any questions, issues, or concerns, feel free to send me a message in Canvas. I will be this week, probably Monday, Tuesday. I'll have the work that we have done so far graded. I'll give you feedback on your discussion board posts. I've been reading through them. I just haven't had time to respond, right? So I'll be providing comments, things like that, and for those discussion board posts. And I'm sorry about the Zoom meeting stuff. I've been trying to figure out a time that works for me and that I can do consistently every week. My schedule's really busy right now, so I'll lock that in. But like, if you ever need or ever want to have a Zoom meeting with me, just send me a message and we can figure that out too. If you want to go over anything in class, things like that. I know this is an online class, but like I said, I want to make that option available to you, okay? So, all right, that's it for now. Take care, have a good week, and then let me know if you need anything. Have a good one. Bye.